Hi, Year 11. I'm Ms. McIntosh, and I'm here to talk to you today about writing speeches in your post-Easter assessment, because as you know, that will be your writing task. So here's the basics. Language paper 2, section B. You will complete one and only one non-fiction writing task, and it will be a speech. You have 45 minutes to write it. You're marked out of 20. 12 of those marks is for content and 8 are for spelling, punctuation, and grammar. And we're going to go into that a little bit more deeply, as well as looking at some tips for writing top quality speeches. So in every one of these slides, I've got the level band descriptors from the exam board about what you need to do. So what we're going to do is use the language of the top band, because if we aim for that and we come short, we'll do a lot better than if we were aiming for the bottom band, won't we? So how your speech is written is one thing you're assessed on, and how your speech is organized is the second thing you're assessed on. How your speech is written doesn't mean spelling, punctuation, and grammar. That's a different mark. What it means is sophisticated understanding of the purpose and format of the task and sustained awareness of the reader/intended audience and appropriate register. We'll talk about register in just a second. And then how your speech is organized. How are you organizing information and ideas using structural features to support coherence and cohesion of text? Does your speech flow beautifully? Does it have the right structure? Do you have 3 separate arguments set out in a convincing and persuasive, sustained way? That's what you need to do to get into the top band. So, purpose, form, and audience are really everything that we're focusing on here. What is the purpose of your speech? What is the correct form and the standard conventions of a speech? If you begin your speech by saying, "Dear ladies and gentlemen of Pinner, I'm addressing you today to discuss da 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 da." Now, there are speeches that sound that way, but that sounds a lot more like a formal letter, doesn't it? So there's lots of conventions of speeches, ways that we have of presenting information and arguments that aren't quite the same as they are in other types of transactional writing. What language choices should you make to best match the needs and expectations of your specific audience? So if you're talking to a collection of local doctors, you'll talk very differently to if you're talking to a collection of local 5-year-olds. But at GCSE, you're really not going to be given a range of audiences that specific. And your main audience that you have to remember, as I've said here, what audience should you never forget? Hint, it rhymes with schmexaminer, is the examiner. So even if you were told, write a speech to be given to students, in reality, you might use an awful lot of informal features or features of multicultural London English, which is the local dialect that we can all switch in and out of. You would never do that in an exam task like this, because it doesn't really want to write you to write for young people. It wants you to write for the examiner as if you were writing for young people. So, depending on the purpose and what your speech is supposed to achieve, your language choices and your style will be very different. So we've got 2 main sort of reasons for a speech given here. Number 1, to persuade, and number 2, to inform. I'll just take you through the differences there. And as you can see, with my grade descriptors down the side, we're looking at sophisticated understanding of the purpose and format of the task. So understanding really how your choices are shaped by the purpose. So in a persuasive argument, when you're trying to persuade, facts are presented only to support the speaker's argument. You're not giving a wide range of statistics and scientific studies and information. You're just using the ones that make your point. Whereas if you are speaking to inform, you're presenting facts objectively, right? In a persuasive speech, you're trying to manipulate your audience, right? You're trying to use language to provoke pity in some instances, or anger, or amusement to get them on side, or resentment if you want them to go along with you on the idea that we're all hard done by by having to wear school uniforms or not have chewing gum, or any one of the many things you've had to write speeches on since year 7. Whereas again, to inform, you just give the facts in an emotionally neutral way. You might give both sides of the argument, but you're not tipping your hand with lots of emotive language either way. In a persuasive speech, absolutely, you should be giving personal opinions, and you can be using anecdotes, which aren't a scientific or very empirically valid way of presenting a case. So again, in a to inform case, you wouldn't give opinions and you wouldn't have anecdotes. You might instead have a case study, right? And then in a persuasive speech, a range of rhetorical devices to shape the audience's mood. You'll have gone over those in class. We've got plenty of resources across the internet and on our site telling you all about such wild and wonderful things as anadiplosis and anaphora, in addition to the things we're more familiar with, like a quick bout of alliteration or a rule of three, or like repetition for emphasis. Whereas in a speech to inform, few or no literary or rhetorical techniques, right? We don't associate those with truthfulness and objectivity, so you wouldn't really have those there. The form is the same as with every single GCSE non-fiction task, at least 5 paragraphs, an introduction, 3 main points, and a conclusion. Can't stress strongly enough that you should take the time to plan out what your 3 main points are going to be, because each one of them should be different, right? 3 separate arguments. Then include topic sentences at the start of each of the 3 main paragraphs, right? A different topic sentence to introduce each of your 3 arguments. The first sentences summarize the argument you're about to make, and then discourse markers throughout to move your audience along with your argument. Moreover, additionally, on the contrary, however, similarly, you're sort of putting up directional flags to show which way your argument is going and help everyone follow along with you. And of course, rhetorical devices like a list of 3, rhetorical questions, use of statistics, use of hyperbole, anecdote, etc. What do topic sentences look like in practice? Well, essentially, if I took a highlighter and highlighted the first sentence of each of your 5 paragraphs, it should sort of make sense as an essay. I should be able to understand what's going on. So I've taken one here, a sort of model answer for a question about mobile phones in schools, and I've taken out the topic sentences. So in the opening paragraph, is modern technology a blessing or a curse? We've started there with a rhetorical question, asking our audience to be thoughtful, and then we're immediately going to start answering that question ourselves. We don't actually want them to answer. Paragraph 1, my first argument. Screen time makes existing mental health problems worse, and we're already in a mental health crisis. And then I'd go on to probably make up some statistics about youth mental health services, discuss some made up scientific studies on the impact of phones on isolation and stuff like that. Paragraph 2, phones enable bullying and bullying kills. All over the press lately have been stories about sexual bullying in schools with the website Everyone's Invited. So we could write a very emotive paragraph there about how bullying can create enormous mental health problems that can lead to terrible, terrible outcomes, and that's enabled by phones in schools and outside of schools. Paragraph 3, however, it is absolutely true that there could be immense benefits in allowing phones in classrooms. This is a tricky and clever thing to do. You take one of the points that you know your audience might be thinking, and you concede it and say, yeah, it's true that phones could be an absolute benefit in the classroom, and go through the reasons why they're a benefit. But then say, but you have to weigh that against the downsides, which is why in my closing paragraph, I've said, a choice lies before every one of us, and each of us has to ask ourselves if it's worth opening up our school to bullying, sexual harassment, and mental illness, just so we can Google the answer to geography questions that we could have looked up the night before. So see where in paragraph 3, I looked like I was taking the argument seriously for using phones in classes. Actually, I was just setting up to destroy that argument, right? So my audience might think of it, and I'm like, haha, I know you're thinking of it, but here it is. The way you could use that in your daily life is you could say, Mum, you're going to look at my room and say it looks like a bomb site had hit. But what if I were to tell you that 90% of teenager time is better spent revising for exams than it is organizing their clutter? Now, this almost certainly won't work, but it will be a very good example of this technique. Right, now, here's the bit where you can most easily go wrong, which is finding the right language choices for your audience. So they've used the word register throughout. Your teachers may or may not talk to you about that. So I'm just going to go through this. You choose the correct register for the audience you've been given. So in GCSE speech tasks, that's almost always a combination of students and staff, right? Even if you're asked to give a speech to year 11 about, I don't know, new homework programs, there will be teachers in that room. There will be staff governors in that room. So you're adapting for them, but you're also adapting for the examiner audience. But then quite often it'll say, give a talk or write an article for teachers and staff, in which case, again, you need to make sure that you're not using language too closely associated with young people and not using language too closely associated with a professional grown-up audience. So in general, don't be too informal, but also don't be too formal, because you can go too far the other way and miss your target audience if your target audience is young people or non-specialists. So whatever the audience you're given, never use the red zone registers as the default in a GCSE task. So let's look at this briefly. So low register is what we use among friends. It's conversational, it's slang, it's swearing, right? So the example I've given there is the word bear, right? Miss has told you bear times not to do that. In an informal kind of conversational way, we might say, Miss has told you lots of times not to do that. And then when we're going high formal, we could say multitudes instead, right? We're still in acceptable registers here. When we're in yellow, informal, you're not really showing a range of complex vocabulary, but it's appropriate for a talk to young people. And then that high formal register, as you can see, we've got longer words, polysyllabic words, words that come from Latin, words that aren't euphemisms, a variety of things, words that are polite. You mostly want to be staying in those two registers, and also never go to the highest one. So the highest one there would be multiplicities. Miss has informed you multiplicities of times to stop talking during the register, right? That's not appropriate. Sounds like you've swallowed a thesaurus, and it's almost as bad as if you'd written it using words like bear. Another example below, high formal, we could say that someone died. Informal, someone passed away. That's a euphemistic speech. It's sort of informality. It's not very kind of proper, but you could get away with that in a speech. You'd be better using died. Do not say pegged it. Do not say kicked the bucket, right? But likewise, don't say expired. That's just a bit too formal. And then when we get down to the bottom one, these are my favorites. Can I go toilet? For your low register, you see we've left out the preposition there because we're speaking in MLE, Multicultural London English. Medium, informal, can I go to the loo? Right, so loo is still just too informal there. May I go to the toilet? There we are in our high formal register. Absolutely stay far, far away from the highest. May I have permission to micturate? Right, don't use that, okay? So those two registers, clever switching between the informal and the formal, depending on your audience, right? But generally going to formal. And that, our arrow is pointing there to show sustained awareness of the reader/intended audience. Appropriate register is confidently adapted to purpose and audience, okay? Now, one thing that comes up, even with very confident writers, is they attempt to adapt the way they're showing speech and writing by changing the letters and punctuation and stuff, as we'll see right here. And what you're trying to do there when you do that is something very sensible, and it's something we do a lot in text speak or on Instagram and anything like that, where we use a variety of techniques to represent what I've called here suprasegmental features, which is when we're speaking, we create meaning as much through stress and emphasis and speed and volume and whether we're going up at the end of sentences. So we try and show that in our typing. So some examples there are using capital letters, caps lock. I say no more for emphasis, or using lots and lots of punctuation marks. I say no more, a million exclamation marks, right? Or extra letters. I'm so sick of this, right? None of those are appropriate for handwritten GCSE tasks. If you were typing, there's some other things you can do there as well that aren't available to you handwriting. You really only kind of have one choice with handwriting, and that is underlining. So in order to emphasize, instead of caps lock, we underline. I say no more. One punctuation mark only. Sorry, kids, only one exclamation mark. I say no more. And again, instead of the extra letters to emphasize that extended O and so, we just underline again. I am so sick of this. Right, now that's a really easy way to lose points, so I've kind of gone into detail about that. Breaking down the marks for SPAG, Now, there are some easy ways to sound ambitious and sophisticated because SPAG is not just about your spelling and your punctuation and your grammar. It's also about the range of syntactical structures you're using, what kind of sentences you're using, and how you're using them for effect, as well as the precision of your vocabulary choices. So, here, because people find this difficult, are some easy ways to sound ambitious and sophisticated in your sentence construction. So first, use a blunt, simple sentence for a mic drop effect at the end of a longer sentence. So for example, mental health problems have only grown during lockdown and 1 in 4 young people is now desperately seeking help. We have to change. Next, using rhetorical questions as topic sentences. Your topic sentences don't have to just say straight out what your argument's going to be. Mobile phones are wrong because they cause brain tumors. They don't, obviously, but that will be a topic sentence. But instead, we can do it in rhetorical question form. But do we really want a future where mobile phones are banned? But do you really want to risk your health with the dubious science of the safety of mobile phones? See, much more effective, much more sophisticated immediately. And then finally, and this is what I've been doing with my class, you can, if you really want to impress the examiner, take a very famous sentence or moment from a very famous speech and adapt it to yours. So where Churchill says, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and streets," you could try, "We shall ban them in the playground, we shall ban them in the toilets, we shall ban them in the class and in the corridors," right? Or instead of Bravehearts, "They can take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom," you could try, "They can take our phones, but they'll never take our freedom." Don't do that too much. That's a really good sort of mic drop for your final conclusion paragraph, right? So I thought it might be good to look just a little bit at the very beginning of Joe Biden's inauguration speech when he was elected president and see if he's using these techniques. So is he using rhetorical devices? Has he shaped his speech for the audience and the purpose? Is it in the correct register? What kind of grade are we going to give it? Has he smashed it? Yes, he has smashed it. Let's have a look. This is America's day. This is democracy's day. A day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. Right? So this is America's day. This is democracy's day. We've got repetition of the construction of sentences. We've got simple sentences used for effect there, powerful. We've got clearly there's pause being used for effect. A day of history and hope, of renewal and resolve. That's parallelism of sentence construction, right? So 2 sentences, short sentences constructed in the same way with the terms inside them made different. Through a crucible of the age for the ages, America has been tested anew and America has risen to the challenge. Is he using high register, carefully chosen vocabulary? Yes, he is. Crucible for the ages. America has been tested anew, right? Today we celebrate the triumph not of a candidate, but of a cause, the cause for democracy. So we've got alliteration there. We've got that parallelism again. We've got anaphora, the repetition of clauses at the beginning of sentences. We've got anadiplosis, where you take the last word of a clause and you use it at the beginning of the next. But of a cause, the cause of democracy. The will of the people has been heard and the will of the people has been heeded. So anaphora there, repetition of the will of the people each time, as well as that parallelism of sentence construction. We have learned again that democracy is precious, democracy is fragile, and at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. And there we've got a triple structure. Tricolon is the technical term. And we've got that in two very, very simple declaratives. Democracy is precious. Democracy is fragile. And at this hour, my friends, democracy has prevailed. We've extended it for the third element of the tricolon. That's a very effective technique, right? So now on this hallowed ground where just days ago violence sought to shake this capital's very foundation, we come together as one nation under God, indivisible. Right? As you can see there, that's a very long, complex sentence. So he's moved from using simple but carefully crafted declarative statements to long, complex, reflective ones. So he's moving between all different types of things there. Now, my year 13s have had a look at this one for their purposes. You don't need to be this clever, but they've picked up on the repeated words there, right? Day, America, American, democracy, and one. So the individual words that are coming up again and again, his speechwriter, because he won't have written this himself, has chosen here, and they keep repeating and emphasizing those words. If you were writing a speech about uniform, how would this reply? Well, if I wanted to be arguing against uniform, I would keep emphasizing individual rights. So rights, individual, expression, self-expression, freedom. Those words, those would be my words that came up again and again, that were emphasized over and over again about my speech. The fact that he's doing it for an American election is the reason why the word America comes up so often. And of course, that might seem very obvious, but remember, if you're writing a speech for a school-based setting, then things to do with schools and school rights and pupils and students will be a lexis that needs to be in your speech throughout. Here, he's taken into account his audience by using a highly religious lexis, because an American audience sort of expects that from their president, but that would not be an appropriate lexis for a speech to Noah Hill students. What might be instead? Well, maybe something to do with universal human rights or the Equality Act of 2010, or anything that we tend to use in Britain when talking about rights and respect. Okay, so let's zoom all the way back to the basics. The form is the same as every GCSE non-fiction task: an introduction, 3 main points which are separate arguments, and then a conclusion. Topic sentences at the start of your 3 main paragraphs, discourse markers used throughout, and then rhetorical devices. We've seen some of those being used very carefully by Joe Biden, but you can do the same thing with careful rhetorical questions used as topic sentences, with alliteration, with the rule of 3, and of course with made-up statistics used to hammer your point home, in addition to highly manipulative direct address. Will you stand for this? Join me. Okay, hopefully that was helpful, and I look forward to seeing what you produce.